You already know what to do, but you still don't do it, not because you're lazy, but because your mind is addicted to comfort. David Goggins says procrastination is not a habit, it's a lie you tell yourself every day. And today, that lie ends. If you are waiting for motivation to strike before you move, you already lost the battle, because the voice telling you to wait is the same voice quietly stealing your future, one comfort-filled excuse at a time. And today that voice gets exposed, stripped, and silenced for good. Procrastination does not begin with laziness. It begins with negotiation, that silent bargaining inside your head where discipline gets delayed and comfort gets promoted, where you tell yourself you will start after one more scroll, one more rest, one more mood shift that never actually arrives. And this is exactly where most lives quietly stall without drama or warning, not because people lack talent or opportunity, but because they mistake ease for safety and resistance for danger. When in truth, the real danger is how safe procrastination feels, because it never punches you in the face. It slowly puts you to sleep. This is the brutal insight that separates casual motivation from real transformation, and it sits at the core of the mindset forged by David Goggins, a mindset that does not wait for readiness but hunts discomfort as a training ground for the brain, because the mind only reshapes itself under pressure, not convenience. We procrastinate because delay protects our ego. It protects us from the possibility of failure, judgment, and regret. But it also blocks the possibility of pride, growth, and momentum. And the brain, wired for survival, confuses emotional safety with real safety, and chooses the familiar pain of delay over the unfamiliar pain of effort. This is the first invisible chain, the fear of being exposed as not good enough, the fear that if you truly try and still fall short, you will lose the comforting illusion of hidden potential. So instead you postpone and keep telling yourself that the real you will show up someday. The second chain is perfectionism, the toxic idea that unless the conditions are flawless, your effort is wasted, which turns preparation into a hiding place and standards into shackles, trapping you in endless refining without execution. The third chain is comfort addiction, the soft surrender to ease that teaches the nervous system that struggle is a threat, when in reality struggle is the language through which strength is learned. Then comes the most deceptive lie of all, the future self-delusion, the belief that tomorrow's version of you will somehow be more disciplined, more focused, more driven, without any evidence to support that fantasy except wishful thinking. Tomorrow is built by today's actions, not today's intentions, and the longer you delay, the more you train your brain to trust delay as the default response to challenge. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Procrastination is not a time problem. It is an identity problem, because every time you delay, you silently vote for the version of you that avoids pressure. And every time you act despite resistance, you vote for the version of you that leads from the front. And whichever version gets the most votes becomes who you are. This is why temporary motivation never cures procrastination, because motivation depends on emotion, and emotion is unstable, while identity is built through repeated proof, and proof only arrives through action taken under resistance. The moment you stop asking, "How do I feel?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming with this decision?" the internal conversation changes completely. The brain is plastic, not fixed, but it only rewires itself through repeated exposure to stress followed by completion, not through comfort followed by avoidance. Each time you do the thing you least feel like doing, you are not just completing a task, you are reshaping the internal wiring that determines how future challenges feel. This is what it means to callous the mind, not by chasing suffering for drama, but by training your nervous system to stay steady under pressure, to remain functional when every instinct screams for escape. The dopamine trap makes this battle even harder, because quick rewards flood the brain with pleasure without requiring effort, teaching the mind to crave stimulation without contribution, which destroys patience and makes long-term goals feel painfully slow in comparison. Your phone, your entertainment, your comfort food, your endless distractions all whisper the same message. Relief now is better than reward later, and unless this wiring is challenged, your long-term goals will always feel heavier than your short-term urges. Discipline begins when you stop making relief your primary goal and start making progress your primary standard. The accountability mirror is where this shift becomes real, the moment you stop blaming time, people, luck, or circumstances, and you ask yourself a harder question. If nobody ever rescued me, would I still become who I claim I want to be? That question burns because it exposes dependency disguised as patience. The mirror does not shame, it clarifies, and clarity is the beginning of power. Once you see that procrastination is not your enemy but your signal, a signal pointing directly at the edge of your growth, you start to move differently. You stop waiting for alignment and start building it. You stop demanding motivation and start enforcing standards. You stop romanticizing tomorrow and start owning today. This is where the blueprint begins, not with hype, not with slogans, but with the decision to obey effort instead of emotion, because emotion changes daily, but action compounds permanently. The real shift happens when you stop treating procrastination as something to defeat and start treating resistance as your personal training partner, because every surge of avoidance is proof that you are standing at the boundary of expansion, not retreat. The moment you feel the urge to delay, that is your invitation to advance, not later, not after you feel better, but precisely in that uncomfortable window where your identity is being negotiated. This is where most people hesitate because the mind creates vivid stories about discomfort, exaggerates the cost, minimizes the reward, and convinces you that delay is a wise form of self-care, when in reality it is often self-betrayal disguised as kindness. The mental fortress is not built by crushing feelings, it is built by refusing to let feelings run the command center. You feel fear and still act. You feel tired and still move. You feel uncertain and still begin. And each time you do this, something powerful happens in the background. The brain updates its data and marks effort as survivable instead of threatening. This is how the urge to procrastinate weakens, not through suppression, but through repeated disconfirmation of its warnings. There's also a deeper level to this shift, one that goes beyond productivity and reaches into purpose. Many people procrastinate because they have never clarified what they are truly fighting for, and when the goal is vague, sacrifice feels pointless. When the reason is weak, resistance feels unbearable. But when your why becomes sharper than your comfort, the brain recalibrates its priorities. You stop asking whether the work is enjoyable and start asking whether the work is necessary for the future you refuse to give up on. Procrastination thrives in ambiguity and collapse under meaning. Once you emotionally connect with the long-term cost of delay, the missed skills, the lost confidence, the shrinking self-respect, the widened gap between who you are and who you claimed you would be, the short-term comfort of avoidance begins to taste bitter instead of sweet. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think it is about control, when in truth it is about loyalty to your future self, to your potential, to the version of you that only exists if today's version shows up consistently. Every time you break a promise to yourself, even in small ways, you quietly damage that relationship, and the mind begins to doubt its own word. Every time you follow through, especially when it is uncomfortable, you rebuild self-trust, and once self-trust is strong, procrastination loses much of its grip because you no longer negotiate with the voice that tells you to quit. You recognize it as an old pattern, not an authority. The unbreakable mental fortress is not loud, it is steady. It does not rely on bursts of intensity, it relies on repeated proof. It is built from early mornings when you act without applause, from boring repetitions when motivation is absent, from quiet decisions where nobody is watching but you still refuse to abandon your standard. There will be days when progress feels invisible, when effort seems disconnected from reward, and these are the exact days when procrastination sounds the most logical. This is where most people fold because they confuse feedback with failure. Growth often happens in silence before it becomes visible in performance. Muscles grow in recovery, confidence grows in private wins, and identity shifts beneath awareness long before it announces itself. When you understand this, you stop needing constant validation to continue. You learn to move without guarantees. You train without applause. You build without permission. The urge to delay weakens as your tolerance for effort expands, and eventually what once felt impossible becomes your baseline. This is not because the work got easier, but because you got stronger without realizing it. At the core of this blueprint is a simple but ruthless truth. Nobody is coming to install discipline in your life. Nobody is coming to protect you from your own excuses. And nobody is responsible for the gap between your dreams and your daily actions but you. This is not meant to crush you, it is meant to free you, because the moment you accept full ownership, you reclaim full power. The same nervous system that learned avoidance can learn execution. The same mind that learned delay can learn decisiveness. The same identity that learned comfort can learn courage, but only if you stop waiting for permission to become who you already know you are capable of becoming. Procrastination fades when action becomes non-negotiable, when effort becomes your default response to resistance, and when your standards become louder than your moods. This is how the urge dies, not through force, but through replacement, replaced by a new reflex, the reflex to move forward even when it feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, or uncertain. In the end, the question is not whether this method works. The question is whether you are ready to live without the emotional protection that procrastination provides. Because when you remove delay from your life, you remove your favorite hiding place, and you stand fully exposed to both your limits and your potential. That exposure is terrifying, but it is also where everything real begins. The moment you stop postponing the work of becoming, you step into the only timeline that actually matters, the present one, where your future is being built in real time, action by action, choice by choice, without excuses, without illusions, without later.